Hello and welcome to the Gonzalez Mitchell Show. I'm Clay Mitchell.
And I'm Patrick Gonzalez.
And today, Patrick and I are going to speak and have a sort of a roundtable discussion with Len Foxwell, who's the principal at Avon Strategies. Len, how you doing?
Doing great, Clay. How are you? Patrick, it's great.
Well, I'm awful tired after this last session, reading the news and looking at my taxes and all that. So I'm a little bit worn out, my friend.
I think you speak for a large number of Marylanders who are exhausted, not only by what's happening at the federal level with Donald Trump adopting a different position on tariffs with each passing day to the catastrophic detriment of the U.S. economy, but also what's happening in Annapolis with this endless blizzard of taxes and fees and the way in which the Maryland Democratic majority uh, approached it in such a sanctimonious manner as if it is our moral obligation to pay more in taxes and more in fees to cover up for a consistent pattern of overspending coming out of Annapolis. So I just think that between what's happening at the federal level in Washington, what's happening at the state level in Annapolis, there's not a lot of cause for institutional confidence among the general electorate.
I actually saw, and like the nerd I am, I look at YouTube videos and live feeds from the legislature. And I actually saw it. I forgot who the delegate was, but he stood up and said, the most patriotic thing you can do is pay the taxes. And I was like, really? So they want to make us all super patriots, I suppose, this time. Because my friend, I,
You know, it's our
I didn't see, I didn't see anything cut of any material bit, and the things that were cut were shoved back onto the counties.
right. I think the counties were a big loser in this past legislative session. Not only did the budget get balanced on the backs of the counties through a ton of unfunded mandates that the counties are going to have to sort out, but that legislation on solar panels actually reversed a longstanding and time-honored tradition and policy tradition in Maryland in which local jurisdictions have the prerogative to set their own land use policies. And that's gone now with the stroke of a pen because now the state can actually come in and supersede local prerogative and install solar panels on farmlands, open spaces, wherever they see fit, essentially.
I think, solar panels today, what will it be next year? It could be some other environmental thing where they say, hey, we're going to preempt local zoning ordinances to help with all of those comprehensive plans. This is what, and I'm speaking as an Eastern Shoreman, this is what we in the blue urban counties want. We don't care what the Eastern Shore or the rural areas want. And that's the thing that disturbs me the most.
I just don't understand the inconsistencies. If this is such a policy imperative, and if this is so vital to our ability to achieve our sustainable energy goals, then why don't we see solar energy infrastructure on every college and university campus? Why don't we see them in every one of our corrections facilities, our public school grounds, any institution that receives a bond bill for capital funds? Why aren't we seeing this as we go up and down Ritchie Highway and York Road and Rockville Pike and the Beltway? Why are we talking about bespoiling agricultural land that is actually the breadbasket for the state of Maryland? Why are we targeting this particular region and this particular topography for this policy? It makes no sense to me on so many levels.
I think they're just looking at farmland in general would be cheaper to do. There might be some engineering problems putting it on buildings. I don't know. But it seems to me that you'd want to do it on impervious surfaces, over parking lots, over buildings. I don't know how many in the House leadership have solar panels on their home, but I'm going to guarantee you it ain't too many. That's the places they should go and not take not take productive farmland off. I've read where in Millington, Maryland, which is a small town in Kent County. There's a farm there. It took off like 2 million pounds of corn, 1 million pounds of soybeans and wheat off the market because of these solar panels. I heard one of the delegates say, "Well, instead of raising crops, they're raising electrons." I don't know what
Right.
to say if somebody talks that way.
I'm sorry, I can't go to Harris Teeter and go walk through aisle 7 and put electrons into my shopping cart and put it on my kitchen table every night, right? At a time when the price of food is going up dramatically, and we are probably going to see further price escalations again because of trade policies coming out of Washington when we are net importers of grain, then why are we undertaking actions at the state level to aggravate these price pressures on agricultural products?
Just I
By
think out of Washington, you're going to see a decrease in the appetite for funding these green energy projects. I think it's short-sighted. You got 3.5 more years to go in the Trump administration, and if there's a dependency on federal funds for this, I think I think that pond is going to run dry.
you went back to, I want to circle back to something you said earlier. It's the Gabe Acevedo quote where he said the most patriotic thing that a Marylander can do is pay higher taxes. Uh, First of all, Gabe Acevedo, I have to say, has been in has had several court actions because of his inability or refusal to pay rent. So someone could come back and say the most important thing that Gabe Acevedo could do, or the most patriotic thing Gabe Acevedo could do, is stroke a rent check at the beginning of every month. I won't say that. I'm just saying that some people could say that. But
That'd be a
also,
good start.
yeah, right. Uh, Also, when you go back and you look at that quote, how many times did he say the word tax? It was tax or taxes over and over again. And I guarantee you, as sure as the three of us are sitting here, we're going to see that speech sliced, diced, spliced however you wish on Republican campaign ads coming up in 2026, probably by Larry Hogan,
The
because
tax,
that's
go
the
ahead.
impression
Go ahead. Sorry.
politic has of the Democratic agenda, fiscally and economically, coming out of this session.
Now, Patrick, you did a poll. I think it was in January, talking about the budget crisis and the appetite for Marylanders to pay higher taxes to plug that large gap in the budget. What were the results of Marylanders being in favor of higher taxes to solve that budget problem?
There was no appetite, Clay and Len, for higher taxes framed as a solution to the budget deficit. I suspect it's gotten worse. I guess one of the things I'm going to be most interesting in kind of following, we've already established the benchmark in January where 59% approved of the job. Moore was doing 28% disapproved. 2 months later, 55% approved, 36% disapproved, with the strong disapproval going up significantly. Plus, between January and March, independents in Maryland went from 53% approval for Moore, 32 disapprove in January, to 34% approve, 43% disapprove in March. That perhaps is the beginning of a trend that possibly could create political problems for the governor as we head into next year's elections.
So, Clay, you've been in my class at Johns Hopkins several times. And Patrick, I would love to have you in my class this fall if your schedule will allow. And Clay, you've probably heard
Absolutely.
ad nauseum about the empty glass theory. Now, this is a bottle. This is not making do with what I have. Every situation, every crisis, every issue debate can be embodied by an empty glass, and someone's going to fill that glass. Either you're going to fill it by telling your story first by telling it all and by telling it yourself, or you're going to be quiet and be off the grid, and someone else is going to come in and tell the story for you. And I guarantee you're not going to like the way they tell your story. And that's exactly what happened to the Democrats, and exactly what happened to Governor Moore over the course of this legislative session. It was a violation of the empty glass theory of politics. They allowed other people to define the legislative theater. The Republicans won on what I call defensive indifference. It's like when you steal a base in baseball and they don't even throw down the second base. It's called defensive indifference. I would characterize a Democratic approach to messaging in this legislative session as one of defensive indifference. And for the, I mean, and I am a huge fan of Governor Moore. He's a friend. I think he is a leader. I don't think he was particularly well served by the legislature's absence of messaging in this past session. But history has shown, and Patrick, you know this as well as everybody, coming out of the legislative session, that 45-day window, the veto session, is when the governor gets the microphone back from the legislature. And that is his opportunity to tell the story about what happened and to make it work to his advantage. And I'm very concerned that right off the bat, the governor is out of the country and is not in a position to tell his story. I'm not going to second guess the governor for taking an overseas trade trip. He may have a very good reason for doing so, and it may be very beneficial to us in the long run. But if I were his chief of staff, I would be saying, Governor, with all due respect, right now, we need to be in Timonium, in Bel Air, in Hagerstown, Leonardtown, Salisbury, and Easton, telling the story of what we did, why we did it, and what the long-term benefits are going to be for the taxpayers and families of Maryland.
Len, you know where
And
my
you're
problem.
right.
Go ahead, Patrick.
No, and Len, you're absolutely right with your empty glass theory, because over the ensuing weeks and months leading into next year's election, there are many empty bottles, I would submit, but there are a couple where the Republicans probably are going to put great effort into filling it with a narrative that is going to be somewhat convincing, because it's going to be tethered to a reality. And you're right. I don't know why. And there are probably great reasons for the governor to be out of the country right now. Probably there were great reasons for Karen Bass to be out of LA and in Africa at the beginning of January. But again, sometimes perception is reality. And unless they do a better job of explaining, and Len, it's not fancy words, it's not messaging, it's taking the reality of what they did and explaining it in a cogent, sort of compelling way for all to look at and accept. And we'll see.
Patrick,
I
I'll
don't
give you
know.
the governor and legislature did something very important this year on a positive level. At a time of fiscal austerity, they managed to dig deep and come up with $500 million in new money for the Transportation Trust Fund that's going to fix potholes, that's going to improve the structural underbelly of bridges, it's going to repave and resurface roads, expand highways. I mean, this is desperately needed money for a transportation system that has become outdated, structurally obsolete, and unsafe. And they need to tell the story, and not just we got $500 million, but what does that mean for the actual taxpayers of Maryland? What are you getting? Does that mean IE1 is going to get a new lane? Does it mean US 15 is going to get some additional lane capacity? Are we going to fill some of those potholes that kill my car every time I drive Charles Street? What does it mean in terms of outcomes? And I think that's part of the challenge that we see in this party, that we define our legislative output exclusively by dollars without talking about outputs. And that's pretty dangerous, because what that means is you lose that connective tissue to the average person who wants to know what they're getting in return for their money. And it also leads to a, a natural conclusion where you define one's commitment to an issue just by talking about how much it costs, so that there's no incentive for fiscal responsibility, because all you need to do is just put a high number on the board to show that you really, really care about education or public safety or healthcare or any of these other issues.
They'll
Yep.
probably get a lot of blowback for this. Uh, and I totally agree with infrastructure. Absolutely 100% it's needed. But I also see things that have been committed in the budget, like when you talk about $500 million for infrastructure, I look at $400 million being committed to Pimlico Racetrack. I don't think it does a damn thing for the people that live in Park Heights. They talk about economic benefits. Yeah, the Preakness once a year, the audience is dwindling for it. It's gone off to these DraftKings gambling sites. The purses aren't there. And another thing I see is programs, and I know I'm going to get blowback for this, like Maryland Public Television. My gosh, how many streaming channels do we have? How many kids channels are there? Uh, I don't understand the value in that anymore. I did in 1970 when there were only 4 or 5 channels and you needed an alternative, but I don't. We spend tens of millions of dollars on that. The other thing, and I'm talking as a rural guy here, the Baltimore City Orchestra is funded and bailed out by taxpayer funds. My gosh, if you can't sell enough subscriptions and enough sponsorships without coming to the taxpayers, it should fail. That's just my view. Priorities aren't there. They're not looking at what the public good is. They're looking for these small little private insular interests, and I just think it's dang wrong. And then on top of that, you want to put solar panels, utility scale, shut down on the Eastern Shore. I'm angry, Len. I really am.
I think that something happened early in the legislative session that kind of encapsulates so much of what is insufficient in our legislative culture right now. You may remember we talked about this back in January, where the governor, to his credit, came out in support of beer and wine sales in grocery stores. Now, this is a policy, and Patrick, I think you've polled on this in the past, so you have the ability to substantiate what I'm about to say, but the overwhelming majority of Marylanders support this policy. It's convenient for people. It will probably make grocery stores even more viable in economically disadvantaged areas that currently have food deserts and are living under food deserts. There are a number of reasons to do it, mostly because of just convenience to the consumer. And it doesn't cost the taxpayers a dime. And the legislature shot it down immediately. It's almost as if the only things worth fighting for are the things that cost money. Why not give people in a year in which the people of Maryland had to suck it up and eat so many bitter root vegetables in the form of higher taxes, higher fees, higher electricity and gas rates? Why not give a couple of sweeteners? Why not do something that people actually like? That was an easy thing to do, and we didn't do it. And we're still one of 4 states that doesn't.
Len, I always give credit
And
where credit's due. And I give Governor Morrison credit at the beginning of the session where he tried to work with the Kerwin plan to try and get it spread out so that it's more affordable in the long term. And to, she's accrued a lot of power, which is Speaker Jones, and her leadership there in the House. They just swatted that away within one day. She has the votes and said no, it's going as it is, and the governor didn't do anything, to my knowledge, to push back on that to the detriment of taxpayers. Um, I mean, he tried it first, but it's just like Speaker Jones said no, and that was it.
So I want to go back to something that we've talked about in our classes, and Clay, you've been here for this, and that is the tangible consequences of gerrymandering. Okay, so we have a system now in which the legislatures or the legislators now have the red pen. They get to they get to draw and mark up the legislative districts as they see fit, right? And what we have in Maryland now, out of 47 legislative districts, 37 of them are single party districts. It means they're either 4 Republicans or 4 Democrats. And the handful where there tends to be where there's a blend of some Republicans and Democrats, that is usually the product of a special legislative subdistrict to create another Democratic slot somewhere, like in District 29 or in District 31 or whatever like that. But you hit on something that's very important. Why aren't we seeing any kind of fiscal responsibility when it comes to billions of dollars in unfunded spending mandates? Why are we seeing doubling down on environmental policies that are extremely well intended, but are not exactly attainable and will end up costing so much more to the taxpayers, so much more in the near term? Well, it's because we have a system where a Democrat right now is not vulnerable to a Republican challenger in a general election, period. The only challenge that a Democrat faces for his or her reelection comes from a potential challenge from the political left in the primary. So as long as they cover their left flank and allow no oxygen for a progressive challenger to emerge on the scene, they can serve in perpetuity. And that is a structural flaw of our system. And that's why I would respectfully suggest we need to take a real look both at independent redistricting, and we also need to take a serious look at ranked choice voting, which rewards moderate candidates with broader message frames intended for a broader audience and not just politicians who are speaking exclusively to their base.
Patrick, do you have you have a parting thought?
No, that sums it up pretty well. And why do politicians kind of disconnect themselves so often from their constituents? Because they can. And as Len so precisely pointed out, the way the whole structure is, the only thing most incumbents, and we'll cite Democrats right now, have to worry, it's not a challenge, as Len said, from a Republican, it's a challenge from within, which very much motivates, frightens is a better word, that incumbent to toe the party line. And, again, why do politicians stay disconnected from their constituents on so many things? Because they can. And they will continue to until they can't. How long does that take? I don't know. In Maryland, 90% of voters say they favor making possession of a stolen firearm a felony. And here we are all these years later and nothing happened. And that's fine. You get away. At some point, I submit, and this is not party driven, this is just politics driven. An elected official who is out of step with his constituents can do it until it grows to a point where they can't. And I don't know where that point is, but we're going to find out.
I agree, Patrick. That's well said.
Well, Len, we need to get back together, the three of us, and a week or two, maybe when the governor gets back from Asia, and talk more about the session and the implications of what's been done, and take a deeper dive into that. And I'll also see you coming up soon at your Hop Start program, which I'm looking forward to.
Look forward to
But
it.
Len, I look at the clock on the wall, and our time is coming to an end, my friend. So it's coming to be that time where you got to say goodbye, Patrick.
Goodbye, Patrick.
Goodbye, Patrick.
Goodbye, Patrick. And Len, thank you so much for being here today. I enjoyed our discussion.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
You too.
You too.